I'm Courtney. We're a family of 5 trying to grow as much of our own food as we can, and we raise chickens. Our kids wanted to name our little backyard farm, so we did. It's called Heart Pine Farms. Here are the simple planting methods we use to give our tomato plants a strong start in the garden every year. We know there are tons of them out there, and we're just sharing what has proven to work for our tomato plants through our 10 years of growing them in Zone 7B. A little background story for this year is I potted up these tomato seedlings on May 4th because we're going to be moving in the near future, and long story short, I didn't know where to plant them. I decided on June 7th to plant them in our current location. So we're finally planting our tomato plants out in the garden, and I probably won't get them all done tonight. I usually just get to work out here maybe an hour at a time, maybe a couple of hours, so we're just going to piece it all together till we get it all done. These are 4x8 beds, and we're planting 8 beds of tomatoes. First, I'm going to do San Marzanos. We're planting 1 bed of San Marzanos, 4 beds of Romas, 1 bed of Cherry Bomb, and 2 beds of Skyway. And these varieties that we grow here in South Carolina, Zone 7B, they have not had issues setting fruit in the heat before. And many times, we've been growing them for about 10 years here, and I have planted them around June 1st several times, and they've done great. I have my map all drawn out here, and I just kind of use the old school method of drawing a quick map of the garden every year just to help me with crop rotation. We do our best to practice that here in our garden, especially with tomatoes because they're pretty disease prone. So we never plant tomatoes in the same bed 2 years in a row. 4 years would be the best, but even with 28 raised beds, that's a challenge for us. So really 2 to 3 years is my goal. Looking back in this bed right here, last year we had corn, and then we had a fall planting of carrots, and then the year before that we had zucchini growing in this bed. The year before that we had peppers growing in this bed. So I try not to plant tomatoes after peppers or peppers right after tomatoes, but it's been a few years since peppers have been in this bed, so it's a pretty safe bet. This is how we cage our tomato plants in our 4x8 raised beds. We used untreated boards to make these frames right here that we screwed into the short ends of our beds. And we plant the tomato plants right up against the frame, which has cattle panel attached to it. And then I'll show you how we cage the plants when we get them planted. But we plant 4 tomato plants in each 4x8 raised bed because we've found that the least amount of plants in each bed means the bigger harvest that we have and the less chance for disease, because we're in the south and we do have quite a lot of humidity, so airflow helps prevent disease. These frames made of wood we've found to be the sturdiest option. We've tried so many ways to cage our tomato plants, and we get a lot of really high wind in our space right here, and we've lost quite a few tomatoes, but these are very sturdy with the cattle panel attached to them, and we have not had any damage due to wind after we started using these a few years ago. I just planted 1 San Marzano plant, and you can see how I planted it as deep as possible because new roots are going to form on the stem and down into the soil, and that's just going to make the plant really strong and take off. The other thing I did was I pruned off the branches that were at the bottom of the plant, maybe 6 to 8 inches up. We really don't want these leaves to come in contact with moisture from the soil because that can cause disease. So I like to try to keep the tomato plants, especially when I first plant them, pruned 6 to 8 inches up and removing the suckers. So suckers can still grow and then produce fruit, and I don't like to remove all of them. Some gardeners like to remove them all, and some don't remove any. I don't go crazy removing all suckers on my tomato plants, but I do remove maybe half of them, especially the bottom ones, to improve airflow throughout the plant and decrease the risk of disease. This is especially the case in the hot and humid summers we experience here in South Carolina. As the season progresses and the plants get big and then I get really busy, I kind of let the pruning go except for unhealthy looking branches and those that touch the ground. We grow a lot of plants and they start producing, and then my energy is shifted to harvesting and preserving. Something else about suckers is that you can even make new plants with them after you remove them by putting them in a pot with moist soil in a partially shady spot outside. I would love to do this because I don't like throwing away healthy looking suckers, but I just don't have the time and space. The only thing we use to fertilize our tomato plants and really everything that we plant in our garden is compost. And a couple of weekends ago, or you can really do it right before you plant, I added maybe 2 to 3 inches of mushroom compost. And if we don't have enough of our own compost, we buy mushroom compost from a local business. but I added it right to the top, and I really didn't even turn it under because it's gonna get watered down into the soil. Maybe I'm actually gonna add some fish emulsion, 1 ounce to a gallon of water, that I'll water these tomato plants in with, and I might do that once every couple of weeks, a few times, but that really helps the plants take off. So I'm gonna plant the next San Marzano plant right here. So I kind of marked its spot right here. I'm gonna plant it right up against this panel right here. I'm just gonna dig a hole down here. I'm gonna try to dig it as deep as I can. You can see that the soil, because we add so much compost, is nice and loose. It's not compacted at all, which is good for all of the plants that we plant out here. I'm gonna remove the plant from the pot here. You can tell it has nice healthy roots already, and it's not super root bound, so that's good. I'm just gonna very lightly loosen the bottom. Put it down in here. I'm just planting this one right here. You can see that I pruned off the lower branches there. And we're planted right up against this panel, which is going to be plenty of support on this side, and then we'll cage them up in just a minute. But you can see how they're staggered here. So one plant's going to be back here, and then there's one here, here, and here. So they're at least 18 inches away from each other, and they will have plenty of space. Here's the last one that we'll plant right here. So now that the plants are planted in this bed, the next really important step is mulching. I'm just adding a really good layer of pine straw here, and this just happens to be what we use in our garden because it's easy for us to get, and we've been using it for about 10 years, and it really helps the soil hold moisture, and it helps prevent weeds. Not 100%, but it helps keep them out, and they're a lot easier to pull when they do pop up. So really, you can use any kind of natural mulch that you'd like, you know, like wood chips or straw. You just want to make sure that it is chemical free, so you know where you're getting it from, and you know that there are no persistent chemicals in it, because that will affect the plants, and we don't really want that in our food. So the mulch we like to use is as natural as possible. We actually have woods behind our house, so it's easy to get the pine straw. And so we've heard that pine straw can affect the pH of the soil, but we've been using it for 10 years, and we do soil tests, and we've never had a problem with it. So we just keep using it because it works really well. So here's the first cage. I just lifted it up here and kind of centered it around the plant. And then I'm going to start bending these wires right here, which it helps to wear gloves because it can be really sharp, but I'm just bending them to attach it securely to the panel here. And I'm going to do this to both sides. This is the fish fertilizer that we use, and we'll put a link in the description to this in case you're wondering about it. And I usually just do 2 tablespoons to about a gallon of water. So I use 2 gallons of water here to water in these 4 plants really well. And there we go. So they're all caged up and planted and fertilized with some fish emulsion. And we're ready to go. Next step will be installing the irrigation. But this is 1 bed. We have 7 beds to go. As far as irrigation goes, I can give you some ideas in a separate video. I can show you how we set up our irrigation for each one of our tomato beds, and providing consistent moisture is important for tomato plants. We're just gonna squeeze in 1 more bed tonight, and this is gonna be the cherry bomb bed. And I'm gonna plant just 3 of these in this bed. These are Indeterminate, and they get huge and they vine out. And we just need 3 plants because these are the cherry tomatoes that we use for fresh eating. So we don't grow as many of these as we do our paste tomatoes and our slicing tomatoes. So you can tell that these plants definitely are ready to be planted outside because they're doing fine, but they're getting really big. So we're gonna plant them. And they're not, honestly, they're not that bad. They're not super leggy, but they're just ready to be planted so that they can take off in the ground. So last night we planted a bed of San Marzanos and a cherry bomb bed, and tonight we're going to be planting 2 beds of Skyway tomatoes. And it's actually a really good time to be planting. We try not to plant when it's really hot and sunny out because there's less stress on the plant that way. So it's nice to be doing it out here in the evening. We grow 2 beds of Skyway tomatoes, and we use them for slicing tomatoes. They make amazing tomato sandwiches. And we also use them, we add them to our sauce because they're really sweet, so they add a really nice sweetness to our sauce. Our sauce is primarily made out of Romas and San Marzanos, but we do like to sneak some Skyways in there too. So we'll have 8 Skyway tomato plants total when we're done here. I think these plants have taken off after just 24 hours being outside. What do you think? I think they're looking like they're already taken off. There was a storm that went right by here today, and it went just to the south and actually dropped a bunch of hail. So we kind of lucked out that we didn't get that because that would have been pretty damaging to these tomato plants. Now we're getting ready to plant our Roma plants, and luckily we have another nice overcast day, which is perfect for planting tomatoes. So we're gonna do 4 beds of Romas, so 16 plants total. These are the ones that we make our sauce and salsa with. So we plant these. This is the variety that we plant the most of in our garden, and this one's looking pretty good. This one, not so much. Some of these aren't doing as well. For some reason, the Romas were kind of struggling in these pots, but I think they're still gonna be okay. Once we get them planted out here, they'll take off. A couple of weeks later, after planting, you can see how these tomato plants have taken off in the garden. Even the Roma plants that were pretty sad looking have taken off with nice and healthy new growth. I haven't given them fish emulsion since I planted them. I do need to do some pruning, but it's been a rainy week this week, and I hold off on pruning until the plants have dried to avoid risk of disease. We'll make another video showing how we prune our tomato plants. There are lots of methods and debates about tomato plant pruning, and I'd just like to share what has been working for us here in our growing zone.